Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today, I'll draw another coffee shop. Well, I always like drawing coffee shops because it just so happens that these shops all look very nice. The color scheme of this shop is bright and simple, and the lighting is also good. It's only today that I've started to understand how to do watercolor sketches. It's not about copying a photo and drawing everything you see. Instead, you need to focus on certain elements. The goal isn't to make it look incredibly realistic, but to capture the effect you want to see. You might need to imagine what the finished piece will look like before you start, and then allow yourself to elaborate a bit on the parts that particularly interest you during the process. Of course, all of this is based on the assumption that you already have a certain foundation in drawing and understand the characteristics of watercolor painting, so that you can clearly know how to realize your ideas. In other words, first sense what it is about the reference image you've chosen that moves you the most. Is it the color, the shape, or the lighting? If you can't quite distinguish it clearly, that's okay too. After you've painted enough watercolors, you'll understand what it is you want to express. I usually start with the general color scheme, considering the overall effect first and ignoring some of the detailed variations. For example, the color of the shadows overall, it's a cool gray. But if you look closely, each shadow has variations in warmth and coolness. Since the first layer of color has already been applied, even if I add a layer of light cool gray on top, the warm base color will still show through. This way, we can achieve shadows with variations in warmth and coolness. Actually, I didn't draw the door and window correctly at first, because the door should be drawn lower and longer, and the window should be lower as well. But I can fix it later. After all, it's just a quick sketch with a semi-realistic effect. Because watercolors always appear lighter once they dry, this also provides a good opportunity for making adjustments. So there's absolutely no need to worry that even if you don't draw a pencil sketch, you can gradually add layers of watercolor in a light manner. As long as your paper is not the thin and non-absorbent kind, you can make adjustments slowly until you are satisfied. This part wasn't painted correctly. We can just skip it directly. I didn't wait for it to dry completely before I started drawing the outline with a pencil, because I thought the pencil wouldn't bleed. Of course, it still needs to be slightly dry. It doesn't have to be fully dry, but if you think you might need to use an eraser, it's better to wait until it's completely dry before you start. I just didn't want to wait too long, and I'm also particularly reluctant to use a hairdryer. Drawing on watercolored paper with a pencil feels amazing. It's hard to describe, but there's a sense of watercolor and pencil working together. To put it in a nutshell, the first layer of watercolor is applied to create a general shape, which serves as a foundation for the subsequent pencil outlining. It is characterized by its large coverage area and fast application speed. Then, details are added with a pencil based on the broad contours. This sequence is much more relaxed compared to directly drawing outlines on white paper with a pencil. Now, let's start drawing the window. You can paint whatever you see. What needs to be considered is whether to use dry brush technique or wet and wet technique, and where to apply each. The color scheme of this painting is relatively simple, featuring a warm tone that leans towards yellow. Even the plants on the rooftop are depicted with a yellowish hue. As you can see, I don't always paint from light to dark. In some areas, I directly apply deep colors. When painting the plants on the rooftop, first apply a basic color, and then overlay a slightly darker and greener hue. It doesn't matter if they don't blend perfectly, because the difference between the two colors is minimal. It's just to create a contrast in hue. It's best to use a waterproof pen to paint these chandeliers for a better effect. However, you can also first apply a base color with watercolor and then outline with a fountain pen for a more delicate result. It's best to use the wet and wet technique for painting these window panes, as it will make the color transitions more natural. So, when mixing the colors, it shouldn't be too dry, otherwise it will dry up quickly. Now, let's fix this door frame. Don't worry about the mistakes made earlier. It's okay if you can't completely cover up the previous errors. In fact, the chance of being able to cover them up mostly is over 90%. This is just a practice. and the overall style is supposed to be a bit messy. Yeah, I often comfort myself this way. For the first layer of the green plants by the wall, I used the wet and wet technique and then added some color speckles. Add a touch of bright orange to the wooden frame of the roof to make it look less dull. Then use burnt sienna to deepen the purple for the frame. The flower pots on the roof and the lamp posts were both painted with dark gray. First, apply a base color to the chairs and stools, and then gradually deepen the color layer by layer while shaping them in the process. Perhaps I was captivated by this window, so I spent a lot of effort on it. There is no absolute right or wrong in the art of painting, so you can paint however you like. Although these chandeliers are small, it is important to depict variations in depth and shading when painting them, otherwise, they will look disproportionate. For the streetlights on the rooftop, I plan to just outline them, following the principle of keeping it simple. The entire painting needs to have a sense of priority, and there needs to be a distinction between the streetlights and the chandeliers, in terms of importance. Therefore, the level of detail must be less than that of the chandeliers. They are not the center of attention in the whole painting, so when painting them, you should try to be as relaxed as possible. Now I'm going to use a coffee-colored waterproof pen to emphasize the contours. Since the walls of this coffee shop are white, it's necessary to outline them. However, using black for outlining would create a stark contrast. I prefer a more harmonious color contrast, so I've chosen coffee color. If black were used, it would look very jarring and disrupt the harmonious relationship of the overall color contrast. There are quite a few wires on the left wall. You can selectively draw them. Firstly, it won't look messy, and secondly, you don't have to worry about how to make several wires look good together. It's much simpler if you only consider how to make a single wire look good. Using a waterproof outlining pen and a terracotta red to emphasize the window frames, door frames, and other structures clarifies their shapes. At the same time, the lines won't appear isolated because the color harmonizes with the overall tone of the painting. The legs of the chairs at the entrance of the shop are metallic and black, so you can use a black waterproof outlining pen to draw them, and you can achieve a sketch-like effect. The key point is to get the perspective right, otherwise, it will look very awkward. When drawing the chair legs, try to make the lines as straight as possible. If the first stroke isn't straight, you can add a second or third stroke. In fact, it doesn't really matter if you make several strokes. The combination of multiple strokes can actually look very nice and give a relaxed feel. The shadows on the wooden parts, such as the chair backs, should still be drawn with a terracotta red waterproof outlining pen to avoid excessive contrast. The size and position of these tables and chairs may not be exactly the same as in the reference picture. That's okay, as long as your painting looks harmonious on its own and the relationships between the objects within it are harmonious. Next, we'll draw the steps at the entrance. The most critical aspect is to get the perspective right, following the principle that objects closer appear larger and those farther away appear smaller. When drawing these lines, pay attention to the fact that they are parallel lines. But as the distance increases, the spacing between them will gradually decrease. When painting the small black board at the entrance, even though it is black, it is important to create variations in depth and shading. Add some darker colors to the chandeliers on the ceiling to enhance the contrast. Also, paint a little bit of the interesting details on the wall. Mix several shades of green, varying in depth, to add some depth and dimension to the green plants in the foreground. Now, finally, it's time to add layers to the plants on the roof. Just mix the original olive green with a bit of burnt sienna to create this beautiful yellow-green hue. Maybe add a touch of raw sienna as well. For these yellow chandeliers, add some yellow color to them. And if you wish, you can also add a bit of highlight. However, I didn't do that here because I think it doesn't make much of a difference. Sketch these English letters with a pencil. Then use a light blue to paint the shadowed parts, and finally outline them with a waterproof pen. If you feel the shadows are not deep enough, mix in a bit of Payne's Gray and apply another layer.